there, and welcome back for another deep dive. So glad you could join us.
Yeah, great to be diving in.
Today, we're looking into a pretty significant recent event, the interception of this humanitarian aid ship, the Madleen.
And we're focusing our lens through one particular source, an excerpt from the Madleen Flotilla Interception and Humanitarian Law.
Right. So our mission today is basically to unpack what this source tells us about the interception, the ship itself, and, the wider implications.
Exactly. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the source lays out the Madleen's journey first. It set sail from Sicily June 1st, part of the Freedom Flotilla.
And the purpose, according to this account, was twofold. First, deliver humanitarian aid directly into Gaza.
Bypassing the usual routes.
Sorta, yeah. And second, it was meant as a symbolic act to draw attention to the humanitarian situation there.
And the source mentions some well-known names on board.
It does. Among the 12 crew, it specifically points out activists like Greta Thunberg and the French MEP Rima Hassan.
Okay, so ship sails, aid on board, high-profile passengers, then the interception. What does the source say about when and where?
This is where it gets critical. Israeli forces intercepted it on June 9th. And the source really emphasizes this point. It happened about 185 kilometers from Gaza.
So well out at sea.
Precisely. In international waters. That's a key detail in the source's narrative.
And what happened right after the interception?
The source says the 12 crew members were detained, and the ship itself redirected to Ashdod, the Israeli port.
Okay, Ashdod. Let's talk about the aid for a second. The source is quite detailed about what was actually on the ship.
Yeah, it lists quite a range. Things like baby formula, flour, rice, the basics, but also diapers, women's sanitary products.
Things often overlooked, but essential.
Absolutely. And also water desalination kits, medical supplies, crutches, even children's prosthetics. It paints a picture of very specific needs.
Which makes the interception, especially in international waters, as the source highlights, a major point of legal contention, right?
Exactly. And that's really a core theme the source digs into. You've got the principle of free navigation on the high seas under UNCLS, the law of the sea.
Against Israel's stated reasons. What were those, according to the source?
The source mentions they cited security concerns linked to the ongoing conflict with Hamas.
What?
But the source immediately contrasts this with the view of many legal experts it refers to. Their take. Intercepting a humanitarian vessel like this in international waters is a violation of international law.
And didn't the source mention a specific legal argument tied to the ship's flag?
Yes, that's another layer. It notes the International Center of Justice for Palestinians wrote to the UK Foreign Secretary.
Because the Madleen is UK flag.
Precisely. Their argument, as presented in the source, is that interfering with a UK-flagged vessel, even in international waters, is effectively an attack on UK jurisdiction and sovereignty.
Wow, okay. That definitely raises the stakes. How did the world react based on this source?
Well, the source describes a mix of reactions. The UK government urged adherence to humanitarian law, called for the crew's safe return.
And France, since they had a national involved.
France specifically demanded the release of its citizens,
Yeah.
Then you have countries like Iran and Turkey, which the source notes condemned the act outright as violating international law.
Any mention of public reaction?
Yes, the source does touch on protests happening in several countries, including the UK. The calls were mainly for the release of the crew and an end to the Gaza blockade.
Which brings us back to the reason for the mission. How does the source describe the situation in Gaza that prompted this?
It paints a really dire picture, frankly, citing figures like over 1.9 million people facing acute food shortages, 1 in 5 facing actual starvation.
For staggering numbers.
Yeah, and it stresses how the existing blockade heavily restricts essential supplies getting in.
So, from the perspective laid out in this source, an interception like the Madleen's, what's the impact?
Well, the immediate impact is obvious. The aid doesn't arrive. But the source suggests broader consequences, too. It draws international criticism, fuels the debate around the blockade, and, importantly, might deter future aid missions.
Making a bad situation potentially worse.
That seems to be the implication drawn in the source, yes.
Looking forward, then, does the source suggest any next steps or potential avenues?
It mentions ongoing diplomatic efforts, trying to secure safe passage for aid in the future. And it also flags potential legal routes.
Like challenging the blockade itself.
Or challenging specific actions like this interception, possibly through international courts. Those possibilities are out there, according to the source.
It's quite something. This single event, as presented here, really ties together international law, the harsh realities of conflict zones, and this desperate need for humanitarian access.
It really does. And the source kind of leaves you wrestling with that core tension, doesn't it? The balance between legitimate security concerns, as states argue them, and the fundamental need to get aid to civilians caught in crisis.
Where is that line drawn? And how effective are these kinds of missions ultimately?
Yeah, those are the big questions this source prompts you to think about.
Definitely a lot to consider. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for unpacking the source with us.
My pleasure. It was an important one to discuss.
And thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Goodbye.